Former President Trump's eldest daughter, Ivanka Trump, testifying in her family's $250 million civil fraud trial. She is the fourth and final member of the Trump family to give testimony on the witness stand, following her brother and her father and both of her brothers, Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump. So I want to now bring in our ABC News senior investigative reporter, Aaron Katersky, who's been following this for us. So, Aaron, the Attorney General today essentially trying to prove that Ivanka benefited directly from this fraud, right?
She did. Attorney General Letitia James said Ivanka Trump was cordial. She was friendly, kind of everything that those prior witnesses you mentioned may not have been on the witness stand.
Good to see you. Dr. William here. So let's get started, guys. Federal agents raided a Trump Tower unit in Florida belonging to two Russian businessmen operating through a shell company. The timing was striking, happening simultaneously as old investigations into Ivanka Trump's overseas business dealings resurfaced.
But in the end, James said that Ivanka Trump benefited from the fraud that she has alleged. And on the witness stand, Ivanka Trump conceded she received $4 million when the Trumps sold the old post office building in Washington, D.C., which they had converted into a luxury hotel, part of a big $139 million sale. And to James, those are the proceeds of fraud because the original financing for the property given to the Trumps was done based on fraudulent financial statements.
This wasn't a rumor or leak. The FBI obtained a warrant, convinced a federal judge of probable cause, and physically executed the search. Whatever you think of the politics, that's the actual government saying on the record, we believe a crime may have occurred. Now, before we go any deeper into this story, I need you to understand exactly what went down, because the details matter here.
President Trump and his companies reportedly turned to Russian mobsters to grow his real estate developments. A new report from USA Today reviews court cases, government, and legal documents. The paper also spoke with the former federal prosecutor. The report says as part of Donald Trump's push to expand his real estate holdings, Trump, his company, and partners repeatedly looked to wealthy Russians and oligarchs from former Soviet republics. Several were allegedly connected to organized crime in Russia. At least 10 of these businessmen have been linked to the president and his company. The bottom line, Trump's business empire allegedly tied to Russian mobsters.
Thursday morning in Sunny Isles, Florida, a stretch of coastline known for its gleaming high-rise towers and the kind of wealth that doesn't exactly announce itself with press releases. This is where one of the Trump-branded properties sits, right there against the Atlantic Ocean, all glass and marble and luxury finishings designed to attract international buyers with serious money. The FBI arrives and they go straight to Unit 4102. Not a polite visit, not a request for an interview, a search warrant execution, and the owners of this particular slice of Trump real estate are two men named Oleg Patulia and Andun Makarov, both Russian nationals whose names might not ring any immediate bells for the average American, but whose business arrangements tell a far more interesting story.
Welcome back to our broadcast. President Trump has repeatedly downplayed his business ties to Russia, but a fascinating new piece of journalism tracks 3 decades of Russian money connected to Trump properties. Trump's Russian laundromat reads the headline in the New Republic, quote, "Whether Trump knew it or not, Russian mobsters and corrupt oligarchs use Trump's properties not only to launder vast sums of money from extortion, drugs, gambling, and racketeering, but even as a base of operations for their criminal activities. Without the Russian mafia, it is fair to say Donald Trump would not be president of the United States. That is a weighty charge."
These two are linked to a corporate entity called MIC USA LLC, which, if that name sounds like something generated by a computer program designed to sound generic and untraceable, well, that might not be an accident. Shell companies exist for a lot of reasons, some legitimate, some considerably less so. And this particular shell company has already been swirling in legal trouble. Lawsuits have been filed, suspicious financial transactions have been alleged, the kind of paper trail that makes federal investigators sit up straighter in their chairs and start connecting dots. And when you start connecting those dots, when you follow the money from this condo in Sunny Isles to the broader network of Trump-branded properties that have been purchased by foreign buyers with opaque backgrounds, suddenly you start seeing a pattern that is very difficult to dismiss as coincidence.
Question, what is it about Trump and the Russians? Which may be even harder to answer. How do you answer?
Well, there's been a lot of great reporting about Trump and the Russians lately, but if you want to know when he was first compromised by the Russians, I go back 33 years to 1984, and at that time, a guy named David Bogatin walked into Trump Tower. He was a Russian immigrant, and he had ties to the most powerful crime ring in Russia. And he sat down with Donald Trump, and he bought not one apartment, not two, but 5 condos in Trump Tower.
The FBI clearly saw enough in those patterns, enough in those financial records, in those corporate filings, and those lawsuit allegations to convince a judge that there was something inside that condo unit worth looking at, worth obtaining a warrant for, worth sending agents in to collect.
And the state attorney general later ruled that that was laundering money. And Trump Towers, in many ways, had been set up as a perfect vehicle for money laundering. It was at the time, it was one of only 2 buildings in New York City where anonymous people could use shell companies to buy condominiums.
And whatever they found, whatever they are still finding, we may not know the full scope yet, but the fact that this operation happened at all tells you this investigation is not in its infancy. This is not a fishing expedition. This is a targeted action based on evidence that has already been gathered. But remember what I said about timing, because this is where the story expands into something much bigger than a single condo raid in Florida. At the same moment this is happening, federal investigators are reopening their examination of Ivanka Trump's international business dealings, specifically the projects she was deeply involved in when her father sat in the Oval Office during his first term. We are talking about luxury developments in Vancouver, in Panama, and other global hotspots where the Trump brand was being licensed and promoted, and where Ivanka herself was the public face of the enterprise. She flew out to these locations. She attended grand opening ceremonies. She posed for photographs and gave interviews, and lent her personal brand and her White House proximity to these projects in ways that raised serious ethical questions at the time and are now raising potential legal questions in the present. The core issue that investigators keep circling back to is whether these international Trump projects served a dual purpose that nobody was talking about publicly. Did they function as legitimate business ventures on the surface, while simultaneously providing a mechanism for foreign actors, including individuals connected to Russian interests, to move money, to hide assets, to launder funds through the prestige and the complexity of luxury real estate transactions? And the even sharper question, the one that has Ivanka's name attached to it specifically, is whether she knew or should have known what was happening with the financing of these projects. Was she an unwitting participant in a scheme she didn't understand? Or was there awareness at some level within the Trump organization about the nature of the money flowing through these deals? These are not casual questions being thrown around by political opponents trying to score points. These are the questions that federal counterintelligence investigators were asking years ago. Investigations that never formally concluded, that never resulted in public charges, but that also never truly went away. They went dormant, waiting for new evidence, new leads, new reasons to open those files back up and start pulling on threads again. And now, with FBI agents physically searching a Trump Tower condo owned by Russian nationals with shell company connections, it appears those dormant investigations have been jolted back to life. Now, I want to address the elephant in the room because I can already hear the objections forming. Some of you are thinking this is just another chapter in the endless Russia saga that has been used to undermine Trump since before he even took office the first time. And I understand that fatigue. I understand that after years of headlines and investigations and accusations, there is a natural instinct to tune it all out, to assume that if something real were going to stick, it would have stuck by now. But I need you to consider something important about the current landscape. Donald Trump is not an outsider fighting against the establishment anymore. He is the establishment. He is the sitting president of the United States, occupying the most powerful office on the planet for the second time, with all the levers of government at his disposal, including oversight of the very Justice Department that is now executing search warrants on properties bearing his name. This is not some faction operating in the shadows to sabotage his campaign. This is the federal law enforcement apparatus, the same apparatus that answers to the executive branch he now leads, moving forward with investigative actions that require judicial approval, that require layers of oversight, that require evidence substantial enough to convince a judge to sign off. That changes the equation entirely. When the FBI raids a Trump-branded property while Trump is president, that means the evidence threshold was met. That means whatever they have is serious enough to overcome any institutional hesitation about the political firestorm that would inevitably follow. And the fact that this is happening now, in his second term, when his family's business entanglements were supposed to be old news, settled history that tells you something significant about what investigators may have uncovered. Let me take you deeper into the money laundering angle, because this is where the mechanics of these schemes become important to understand. Real estate has long been one of the preferred vehicles for cleaning dirty money anywhere in the world, and luxury real estate in particular is almost perfectly designed for this purpose. You take funds that originated from illicit activities, corruption, fraud, sanctions, evasion, organized crime, whatever the source may be, and you funnel that money through layers of shell companies and corporate structures until its origins become obscured. Then you purchase a high-value asset, a condo in a prestigious building with a globally recognized brand name attached to it. That money is now tied to a legitimate piece of property. The asset appreciates in value over time. If you ever need to sell it, the proceeds come back to you as clean money, legitimized through a real estate transaction that nobody questions, because luxury properties change hands all the time among wealthy international buyers. This is not conspiracy thinking. This is well-documented financial crime methodology that law enforcement agencies around the world have been struggling to combat for decades. And Trump-branded properties, with their global recognition, their association with wealth and success, their locations in prime real estate markets like South Florida, represent ideal vehicles for this kind of activity. The brand attracts international buyers. The high price points justify complex financing arrangements. The use of shell companies to make purchases is common enough in the luxury market that it doesn't automatically raise alarms. All of these factors combine to create an environment where money laundering can potentially occur, and the question that federal investigators appear to be asking is whether it did occur, whether it occurred repeatedly across multiple Trump-branded properties, and whether anyone within the Trump organization was aware of or complicit in facilitating it. South Florida specifically has become associated with this kind of activity. The Miami area, with its international banking connections, its culture of discretion around wealthy foreign buyers, and its constant churn of luxury real estate developments, has attracted money from all over the world, including significant flows from Russia and former Soviet states. Not every Russian buyer is a criminal, obviously, that goes without saying. But when you see patterns emerge, when certain shell companies keep appearing in property records, when the same names or the same corporate structures show up in multiple transactions across multiple properties, when lawsuits start alleging financial misconduct and suspicious transfers, those patterns start forming a picture that investigators cannot ignore. The condo unit that was just raided, Unit 4102 at Trump Tower, Sunny Isles, appears to be one piece of that larger picture. The owners, Patulia and Makarov, connected through MIC USA LLC, an entity with its own legal troubles and allegations of questionable financial activity, represent exactly the kind of arrangement that would interest federal agents looking into potential money laundering through luxury real estate. And the fact that this particular unit sits inside a Trump-branded building, a brand that licenses its name to developers in exchange for fees, a brand that promotes these properties to international buyers, a brand that benefits financially from every sale regardless of who the buyer turns out to be, that connection is what transforms this from a simple criminal investigation of two Russian businessmen into something that could potentially reach into the Trump organization itself. Trump has always maintained a very specific defense when questions arise about who purchases units in his branded properties. He says he doesn't know the buyers. He says his company merely licenses the name, collects the fees, and has no involvement in or knowledge of the individual transactions between developers and purchasers. The name goes on the building, the checks come in, and whatever happens after that is someone else's problem. On its surface, this is a defensible position. Brand licensing is a common business practice. Trump doesn't personally vet every condo buyer any more than a celebrity endorsing a product personally inspects every item on the assembly line. But here is where that defense starts to develop cracks under scrutiny. When your name is the brand, when your face is on the marketing materials, when you personally attend opening events and promote these properties in interviews and on social media, when your family members fly out to these locations and serve as the public ambassadors for these projects, the claim of complete ignorance becomes harder to sustain. The Trump Organization is a sophisticated real estate operation with decades of experience in international markets. They understand how luxury properties are financed. They understand that certain types of buyers use certain types of corporate structures. They understand what red flags look like because they have operated in this space for a very long time. So, when investigative journalists start publishing reports about suspicious buyers acquiring units in Trump-branded buildings, when lawsuits start alleging financial misconduct by shell companies connected to those buildings, when federal investigators start asking questions that require lawyers and public statements, the idea that nobody within the organization noticed anything unusual becomes increasingly difficult to accept. Either someone knew and chose not to act, or the systems in place to detect problematic transactions were so inadequate as to be effectively non-existent. Neither answer is particularly reassuring, and both carry potential legal exposure depending on what the FBI ultimately uncovers. Now, let me pivot to Ivanka specifically because her role in all of this occupies a particularly sensitive intersection of business, politics, and potential legal jeopardy. Ivanka has always been positioned as the polished face of the Trump brand, the one who could take the brashness and the controversy of her father's public persona and translate it into something that appealed to a more mainstream professional audience. She had her own fashion line. She authored a best-selling book aimed at working women. She delivered speeches at prestigious events. She cultivated an image of sophistication and competence that made her a valuable asset both to the Trump Organization and eventually to her father's political operation. When Trump won the presidency the first time, Ivanka didn't retreat into the private sector to run the business while her father governed. She went to Washington. She became a senior advisor in the White House. She received security clearance. She sat in meetings with heads of state. She represented the United States government on the international stage, all while maintaining ties to the Trump Organization and its ongoing business dealings around the world. This arrangement raised immediate and obvious ethical concerns because the conflicts of interest were not theoretical. A senior White House advisor with access to classified information and influence over policy decisions was also connected to a family business that was actively negotiating deals with foreign entities, foreign governments, and foreign investors whose interests might not align with those of the United States. The potential for those foreign actors to use business relationships with the Trump Organization as a channel to gain access or influence over the White House was not a hypothetical concern. It was a structural reality inherent in the situation. One of the projects that has drawn the most intense scrutiny is the Trump Tower development in Vancouver, a massive luxury project that Ivanka was personally involved in promoting. She traveled there, she attended the grand opening, she posted about it on her social media accounts. She served as the public face of a development that was, according to subsequent reporting, financed in ways that raised serious questions. Who were the investors behind this project? Were there foreign entities involved that might have been looking to establish relationships with the Trump family for reasons beyond simple real estate returns? Was the project used as a vehicle for moving money across borders in ways that might not withstand close examination? These questions were serious enough that the FBI opened a counterintelligence investigation focused specifically on whether foreign governments or foreign actors were attempting to leverage Trump Organization business deals to influence members of the Trump family who held positions in the White House. A counterintelligence investigation is different from a criminal probe. It is focused on national security threats, on protecting American interests from foreign manipulation, on understanding whether adversaries are exploiting vulnerabilities in the system. The fact that Ivanka's business deals were the subject of such an investigation indicates that the FBI believed there was a potential national security dimension to what was happening. That investigation did not result in public charges. It faded from the headlines as other controversies consumed the news cycle. But investigations of that nature do not simply evaporate. They remain in files waiting for new information to emerge, waiting for connections to other cases to surface, waiting for a moment when the accumulated evidence reaches a threshold that justifies renewed action. And now here we are, watching FBI agents execute a search warrant on a Trump Tower condo connected to Russian nationals, and suddenly those dormant questions about Ivanka's deals are roaring back to the forefront of the conversation. The Vancouver project is being mentioned again. Other international Trump ventures in Panama and elsewhere are being examined with fresh eyes. The core question remains the same now as it was then. Did these business deals provide a mechanism for foreign actors, potentially including Russian interests, to move money through Trump-branded properties? Did they facilitate activities that would constitute money laundering or other financial crimes? And did Ivanka Trump, as a senior White House official and a key figure in promoting these projects, have knowledge of what was occurring? I want to be very careful here because I am not stating that Ivanka committed any crime. I am not stating that she knowingly participated in money laundering or that she deliberately helped foreign actors hide assets. What I am stating is that the FBI found these questions compelling enough to open a counterintelligence investigation years ago, that those questions were never fully resolved, and that the current raid in Florida suggests investigators are pursuing new leads that may connect to that older inquiry. Whether those leads ultimately point toward or away from Ivanka is something only the evidence can determine. The Trump family's response to all of this has followed a familiar pattern: deny everything, attack the investigators, frame the entire situation as politically motivated persecution by a biased law enforcement apparatus that has been trying to take them down for years. And this strategy has worked for them in the past because it taps into genuine grievances among their supporters about how Trump has been treated by institutions that many Americans no longer trust. There is a reason the witch hunt narrative resonates. There is a reason people are willing to dismiss FBI actions as partisan when those actions involve the Trump family. Trust in federal law enforcement and intelligence agencies has eroded significantly, particularly among conservative voters. And that erosion creates a defensive shield that the Trump family knows how to use. But this particular moment presents a more difficult challenge for that defensive strategy because of the context in which it is unfolding. Trump is president right now. His appointees run the Justice Department. His administration oversees the FBI. The argument that this is a political operation to undermine him becomes considerably harder to sustain when the chain of command ultimately leads back to his own executive branch. For this raid to happen under these circumstances, the evidentiary basis would need to be solid enough to justify the political attention that everyone involved knew would follow. Federal judges do not sign warrants based on partisan motivations. Career prosecutors do not stake their professional reputations on cases they know are baseless. FBI agents do not plan and execute raids on luxury condos because they have personal feelings about the president whose name is on the building. Something real is driving this investigation, and the effort to dismiss it as pure politics is going to run into the hard reality of whatever evidence the FBI has already presented to a court. The public reaction, predictably, has been intense. Social media platforms are churning with theories and accusations flying in every direction. On Truth Social, the platform Trump himself created, supporters are rallying to his defense, denouncing the raid as the latest salvo in an endless campaign of harassment. On other platforms, critics are pointing to this as a significant development in the long-running inquiry into the Trump family's business dealings. Both sides are operating with strong convictions and limited information, because that is how these moments always play out in the current media environment. But the noise on social media, as significant as it may be, is not the same thing as what is happening in the actual investigative process. The FBI agents who searched that condo are not reading the trending topics while they catalog evidence. The prosecutors who will review whatever was recovered are not factoring in public opinion before deciding whether charges are warranted. The legal process operates on a different timeline with different standards than the public discourse that dominates online conversation. What matters is not what people are posting, but what evidence exists, what witnesses are saying, what documents reveal, and what forensic accounting uncovers about the flow of money through these shell companies and these luxury properties. So, where does all of this lead? What are the possible outcomes that we should be watching for in the days and weeks ahead? The range of possibilities is wide and depends entirely on what the FBI has already gathered and what the search of Unit 4102 yields. At one end of the spectrum, it is possible that the investigation focuses narrowly on the two Russian owners of the condo, that whatever suspicious activity triggered the warrant is limited to Petulia and Makarov and their shell company, and that no charges or allegations extend beyond them. The Trump Organization could emerge from this with nothing more than reputational damage. Another headline about Russians buying units in their branded buildings. Another round of uncomfortable questions that fade when the next news cycle arrives. This outcome is entirely possible. Federal investigations often start with broad suspicion and narrow as evidence develops. But there are other possibilities on that spectrum, and they become progressively more consequential the further you go. If the evidence shows that money laundering did occur through Trump-branded properties, and if evidence emerges that someone within the Trump Organization was aware of or willfully blind to that activity, the legal exposure expands significantly. If Ivanka's involvement in the Vancouver project or other international deals is shown to have intersected with the money laundering activities under investigation, her potential exposure increases as well. And if any of this connects back to Trump himself, if there is documentation or testimony suggesting he knew about or benefited from illicit financial activity conducted through his branded properties, the political and legal implications would be profound. But even if the investigation never results in criminal charges against any member of the Trump family, the political damage is already accumulating. The pattern is undeniable at this point. Trump-branded properties keep turning up in stories about Russian money. International buyers with opaque backgrounds and shell company connections keep purchasing units in these buildings. Investigations keep opening, questions keep being asked, and the explanations offered by the Trump family keep straining credibility. At some point, the sheer volume of incidents becomes its own argument, a pattern so persistent that dismissing each individual case as coincidence requires accepting a level of improbability that rational observers find difficult to accept. The American people, regardless of their political affiliations, deserve to know whether the president's family business has been used as a vehicle for criminal activity. They deserve to know whether foreign actors exploited Trump-branded properties to launder money or hide assets. They deserve to know whether the national security risks posed by these business entanglements were properly addressed or willfully ignored. These are not partisan questions. These are questions about the integrity of the office of the presidency and the potential vulnerability of the United States government to foreign influence through commercial relationships. The answers matter, and the fact that the FBI is still actively pursuing those answers tells us that the story is far from over. What comes next will depend on what those FBI agents found when they opened the door to Unit 4102. It will depend on what documents were seized, what financial records were recovered, what digital evidence was collected from computers and phones and storage devices. It will depend on whether the individuals connected to that condo cooperate with investigators or go silent. It will depend on how broadly the investigation extends, how many other Trump-branded properties get pulled into the inquiry, how many other shell companies get unraveled, how many other international deals get examined under the same scrutiny now being applied to Ivanka's Vancouver project. This is not a story that resolves quickly. Federal investigations of this nature can take months or years to reach conclusions, and the public may not learn the full scope of what investigators uncover until charges are filed or the case is closed. But the fact that this is happening now, while Trump occupies the White House, while his family's business empire continues to operate globally, while questions about conflicts of interest and foreign influence remain as relevant as they have ever been, that fact alone ensures this story will not fade quietly into the background noise of a busy news cycle. The raid on Trump Tower Sunny Isles is not the end of anything. It is a beginning, or perhaps a resumption, of an inquiry that has been building for years, gathering evidence, connecting dots, and now moving into a phase where physical searches and seized materials will either confirm the suspicions that launched the investigation or redirect it toward new targets. Either way, the Trump family is going to be answering questions about this for a long time to come. And the American people, watching from the sidelines as this story develops, will eventually get to see whether the pattern of Trump properties attracting questionable money was merely an unfortunate coincidence or the visible surface of something much deeper and much more troubling hiding underneath.